Hello and welcome to I Know Dino. I'm Garret.
And I'm Sabrina.
And this is our 474th episode and also our year-end wrap-up for the top 23 dinosaur discoveries of 2023.
Woo! That makes it our last episode of 2023.
Yes.
This year went by fast.
It did. And there are so many new dinosaur discoveries. Actually, way more than 23. It was difficult to narrow it down to just 23 discoveries and studies to talk about.
Yes. Yeah, it always is. Although I remember at the beginning of this year, it was kind of a slow start when it came to new dinosaur discoveries.
That's true. And then they came in real hot at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Although, really interestingly, it was very much the year of the herbivore because not a single one of our best new dinosaurs is a carnivore. Unless you include alvarezsaurids. I wasn't sure if that counts as a carnivore because it's like maybe it ate termites most of the time.
Yeah.
That's technically an animal.
That's carnivorous.
But it's like still pretty uncertain what they spent their time eating. So I didn't feel comfortable calling it a carnivore per se.
Are we biased to the herbivores too?
I think so. But then I went back after doing the list and then piecing it together because last year we had the best carnivore and the best herbivore as sort of like the big thing at the end of the list.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, wait, I don't have a carnivore on the list. And I went back and like double checked and triple checked. I was like, yeah, there's nothing that's really exciting enough to be the best carnivore. There were a couple carnivorous dinosaurs named, but they were so fragmentary, and honestly, all of the herbivores that we're going to talk about are more exciting. So it's just...
That's surprising because there were 40 new dinosaurs that we covered this year.
Yes. And also, that's what we covered this year, not necessarily that we're all named exactly this year, because some of those were from like December of 2022. Mm-hmm. We do it based on our podcast year, basically. But anyway, let's get into it. And before getting into it, I should also mention we have Dinosaur of the Day, Elopteryx, and we want to thank some patrons. And this week we're going to thank Dino Dork, RC, Linda, Gabrielle, Seamus B, Reggie, Vincentrosaurus, Lazy Dump Truck, David, and Paul M.
Yes, thank you so much for being part of our Dino-It-All community, and we wish all of our listeners a happy new year. Thanks for sticking around with us, and we're excited for next year.
Yes.
And speaking of our Dino-It-All community, if you're a part of that, we have, if you include our SVP bonus content and our I Know Paleo monthly episodes, we now have over 100 recordings of premium content on our Patreon. So if you're not a part of that yet, now is a good time to hop on board.
Yeah, we added quite a bit this year with 52 new ad-free episodes, one for every single week, 11 episodes of I Know Paleo, including that one bonus, as Sabrina likes to call it.
Yes, the mammoth one.
Also 17 new extended interviews, and then some miscellaneous content like extra SVP stuff, and more dinosaurs on trial and answers from the Q&A.
Mm-hmm.
And for the record, too, our most popular episode of the year was How Dinosaurs Became Birds Update. We did an update on that episode. I think it was the most popular episode last year, and then the update was the most popular episode this year.
I see a trend.
Yeah, people really like knowing about how dinosaurs became birds. It's a really interesting evolutionary arc. So without further ado, we're going to get into our top new dinosaurs, and then we'll get into some of the other top dinosaur studies that we talked about. The first top new dinosaur category is Best Hadrosauroid.
All right.
Because everybody always forgets about the hadrosauroids, and I figured, let's give them some higher billing. We can get on to like the ceratopsians and some of the more popular herbivores later. We're going to give hadrosauroids the limelight for once. So our best new hadrosauroid is Gonkoken. It's significant for several reasons. For one, it was the first subantarctic hadrosauroid.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Which again is sort of this very specific region, roughly 46 to 60 degrees south. And this one is at around 51 degrees south. But more importantly probably than that is that it comes from a really cool site with lots of remains from several individuals, although they were all jumbled up, so they had to pick out just one bone as the holotype. So the holotype itself doesn't sound that exciting because it's just the right ilium from the hips. But when you include all the other bones, They have a lot of the vertebrae. They've got bones from all 4 of the limbs. They've got a good amount of the jaw and the skull.
So we have a pretty good idea of what it looked like.
Yes. And it's also kind of fun because it was pretty small for a hadrosauroid at about 4 meters or 13 feet long. It does look a little bit plain. It doesn't have any fancy head crests or anything like that. Just a typical hadrosaur body plan. But really interestingly, it's a closer relative to North American hadrosaurids than to the Patagonian duckbills. So it's possible that around the time that hadrosaurids evolved, an early species made its way all the way down to southern South America, and that little different group that was sort of isolated or at least evolved separately from the northern Patagonian ones eventually evolved into Gonkoken. So it's a cool dinosaur.
Yeah.
Scrappy little hadrosauroid way down in southern South America that we know quite a bit about.
Yeah, I like hearing about those. Does this count as a polar dinosaur?
Well, it's, I guess, subpolar.
Subpolar?
Being subantarctic.
Because even though it was warmer around those areas back then, it was still a really harsh environment. If you think about the long winter days / night. Well, I say that because it's like dark all day, pretty much.
I forgot to mention, too, the name Gonkoken is kind of fun, too, because it basically means wild duck mimic in a way, or maybe wild swan mimic from Tehuelche, which is just really cool.
Our next top dinosaur of the year goes to the cutest new dinosaur, Minimocursor, a neo-ornithischian we covered back in episode 453.
Minimocursor is very cute. There are some other contenders for cutest dinosaurs, like Vectodromius and Ampelonathus, but that's mostly based on their size because those remains from those 2 that I just mentioned are way too fragmentary to know what they looked like, so you can't see if it had a cute little face like we can with Minimocursor.
Yes, and with Minimocursor, the holotype's over 50% complete, so yeah, can't really compete with that when you've only got fragments. As a quick reminder, it looked kind of like Calindrodromaeus, and it walked on 2 legs. It had a small, round head, short arms, a long body and tail. It's a basal neo-ornithischian, and it's one of the best preserved dinosaurs found in Southeast Asia. I like that they also found ossified tendons. And the jugalbos, it had a cheek horn, which we don't really see in most other basal neo-ornithischians and ornithopods, so it's the oldest evidence of this feature in basal neo-ornithischians.
It's a beauty mark. It's like the opposite of a cute dimple. It's like a poking out dimple.
Yeah. And I guess being small helps it with being cute, and its name goes to that because the genus name means the smallest runner.
Yeah, like a little toddler. Little small thing scampering around.
And they've got more fossils that are still being prepared, including another skull, so we'll know even more about this dinosaur at some point.
Hopefully they don't finish preparing that skull and it's like really not so cute.
I guess you never know.
Yeah.
Our next top dinosaur goes to the dinosaur with the best sauropod tail. Yay, sauropods. That's Ruixinia, which we covered in episode 427. Ruixinia is a titanosauriform that was found in northeastern China, and it lived in the early Cretaceous. There was a lot to say about this dinosaur, but since it's getting the award for best tail, I'll stick with recapping the tail part. They found 52 tail vertebrae, tail bones, in articulation.
That's so amazing.
Yes, and 36 chevrons. Those are the bones that attach to the bottom of the tail vertebrae. So it's one of the most complete tails known from titanosauriforms from Asia so far. And when you put all the vertebrae together, that makes the tail about 14.7 feet or 4.5 meters long.
That's a really long thing to preserve articulated as one.
Yeah, to last that long, millions and millions of years all together. It's pretty amazing. But that's not even what makes it such a cool tail. The last 6 vertebrae are fused together and they form this rod-like or stick-like structure, which is unusual, and it helps show that this was a mature specimen, a mature skeleton, though they're not completely sure. The author said that they need to do future work to figure out the age. You see this fusion in tails of Shunnosaurus, and there's also one specimen of Mamenchisaurus, but they make different shapes. In Shunnosaurus, it's like a club shape. The Mamenchisaurus is this coxcomb shape, but this one in Ruixinia is stick-like. And just because I like talking about sauropod necks, they also found 14 neck vertebrae in articulation, and that's about 13 feet or 4 meters long, but the author said that it actually had more than 15 neck vertebrae or cervicals. Had to throw it in. We're talking about sauropods.
Mm-hmm. Another cool thing about Ruixinia is it's the largest dinosaur from the Jehol biota, which we're mostly usually talking about like little bird-like dinosaurs, so it's cool that there was a big old sauropod in the mix.
And speaking of sauropod necks, this next award, I guess, goes to Inawentu for Best Sauropod Neck. It's one of the only complete necks of a sauropod, which is pretty amazing. It's actually, though, maybe not that long, or at least it doesn't have as many neck vertebrae as other sauropods. They found the complete neck, and there's 12 of them. 12 cervicals.
Yeah, like you were just saying, the other dinosaur had 14, and that wasn't complete. This one has 12, and that is complete.
Yes. So it did have a proportionally shorter neck, but they think it could move that neck in multiple directions based on how the vertebrae looked. And I like this titanosaur because it doesn't look necessarily like you'd think a titanosaur would look. It looks more like a different kind of sauropod, the Ruixisaurids, where it's a low browser, or it probably was a low browser. It had the short neck, its skull was oriented downward, and it had the broad snout and slender teeth. And this dinosaur was found in Patagonia, Argentina, and it lived in the late Cretaceous.
And we'll get on to more new dinosaurs, including our best new herbivore. But first, we're going to pause for a quick sponsor break. Our next dinosaur is the most disregarded dinosaur.
What does that mean?
It's also the largest ornithopod known from Europe in the late Jurassic, if you'd rather have a more exciting sounding name. But this dinosaur is Oblitosaurus, which you may remember means obsolete lizard.
Okay, now I see where you're going with this.
And it was forgotten in multiple ways. So first of all, it was the last fossil or set of fossils to be removed from the site, because apparently the other dinosaurs of the site were more important than Oblitosaurus.
Oh.
They were pretty cool. I mean, it was the largest sauropod from Europe, Turriosaurus, and then also the Stegosaur Dacenturus, which are both really cool dinosaurs.
Mm-hmm.
And as usual, the Iguanodontian gets ignored.
Good thing you're calling it out.
Yep. This dinosaur, also just the communication of it was really fun because the species name honors Spanish filmmaker Luis Buñuel, who was born in that province, and they made like a stylized poster like it was in one of his movies. And he also made a movie that translates from Spanish to The Forgotten Ones. So it works on 2 levels, that forgotten dinosaur name. And that Spanish movie poster says Buñuel's The Forgotten Lizard on it in Spanish, which is really cool. I like how they took it from being forgotten and then gave it a big ol' spotlight, showed it off on this paper, gave it a really cool name. And it is pretty significant. It's about 6 to 7 meters or 20 to 23 feet long, which makes it the largest known ornithopod from its time and place, which was very roughly 150 million years ago. And even though that doesn't sound that big, about 20 feet long, it's about twice as long as the European relative Draconix, and about as big or bigger than Camptosaurus, which was in the US around that time. Being a iguanodontian or an ankylopalexian, they did find not only teeth and a nearly complete leg, but also the thumb spike.
Oh.
Which is always important.
Yes, we were just talking about how much we like those thumb spikes.
They're a very interesting adaptation that you don't see on a lot of animals.
Mm-hmm. And in a similar vein, we've got best, most forgotten sauropod, Igai, which we talked about in episode 456. The full name is Igai Semku, and it means the forgotten lord of the oasis.
It's a good name.
Unless you don't want to be forgotten.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
It's a titanosaur. It lived in the late Cretaceous. It was found in northern Africa, in Egypt. And it's the second titanosaur described from that area.
It was just a few years ago we were talking about Mansurosaurus from that area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that one was named in 2018 and known for its pronounced chin, but it's not about Mansurosaurus today.
We're already forgetting about it again.
Yeah. They are both saltosaurids. Those are the armored titanosaur sauropods. But both of these sauropods have enough differences. That's why they named Igai.
I know one of the differences too is Igai is significantly bigger. It's estimated in the 10 to 15 meter long size, or 33 to 49 feet, whereas Mansurosaurus was probably under 10 meters.
Mansurosaurus was estimated 8 to 10 meters, or 26 to 33 feet long. So yeah, Igai was larger, but I think more gracile. Like Mansurosaurus was stockier. Scientists have known about this sauropod since the 70s. It's been reported in abstracts and a thesis, but it wasn't formally described until 2023.
That's why it was forgotten about.
Partly, yeah. But yay, more sauropods.
Our next award, after all this talking about different sauropods, goes to the best new ankylosaur.
Can't leave those out.
No.
Good thing there were new ankylosaurs this year.
Kind of. It's Patagopelta, which was actually named in 2022, but we talked about it in 2023.
That's why you brought that up. Way to shoehorn it in.
It's not the only thing like that. It was named in December of 2022 also, so it's pretty close. But yeah, Patagopelta is pretty cool. It's from 70 million years ago-ish, from northern Patagonia. It was pretty small. It was only about 2.2 meters or 7 feet long. So if I was being extra biased, I could have called it the cutest dinosaur of the year. But
oh, way to stop yourself.
Yeah, I reserved my biases. Tried to look at things a little bit more without bias.
Good explanation.
Although cute is a pretty biased term in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, Patagopelta, pretty small. They're not sure why it was so small, but it might be because it was actually on an island. Despite being in Patagonia, they think that the area it was in may have been a series of islands in the late Cretaceous due to the ocean basically invading the land and cutting off some spots. So it might have been an island dwarf. And they also found one of its cool cervical half rings, or those pieces of fused armor that basically protect where their shoulders connect to their neck. Kind of like, I always think of them as the collar that knights wore around their neck to protect, unlike those full suits of armor. So, pretty cool dinosaur. And there weren't a whole lot of ankylosaurs to work with, so it gets best new ankylosaur.
And there had to be a best new ankylosaur, of course.
If there's any ankylosaur, it's going to be the best one. And our next award goes to the biggest impact from a small fragment. And by biggest impact, I mean like scientifically speaking. And it goes to Amanasaurus, a silosaur.
Ooh.
Again, silosaurs are the oldest dinosauromorphs in the fossil record, possibly the oldest dinosaurs, depending on who you ask. And that is what made it a pretty big splash, because really all they found was the very lowest end and the very highest end of the femur, two little pieces of the same bone. But those are pretty important pieces when you're talking about dinosaurs, because just how the femur connects to the hip is a really big part of what makes a dinosaur, and also how the lower end of the femur connects to the other bones.
Mm-hmm.
They found that this dinosaur had the oldest evidence of some of these muscle attachments of any dinosauromorph, which could help argue for it being a dinosaur. And they also said that the size of its femur shows that it was about the same size as most of the dinosaurs at the time. It's another piece of it being very dinosaur-like. But they couldn't really measure the femur because, again, they only had the top and bottom pieces. Really, they only had just a couple inches of bone out of what's probably about 5 inches worth of bone. And by a couple of inches, I mean 1 inch from the top and 1 inch from the bottom out of 5 inches. They're technically actually probably from separate femora, but you get the idea. So they didn't really resolve whether or not silosaurs are dinosaurs in this paper. They gave their analysis like both ways, whether it's a dinosaur or not a dinosaur. But I do also love the name because it refers to the Carnian pluvial event, because its name means rain lizard, which is just cool because there weren't a lot of dinosaurs around during the Carnian pluvial event over 230 million years ago.
So maybe it's a contender for best name.
We didn't give a best name category, but yeah. If that was a category, then yes.
Well, our next dinosaur, we found a lot more than fragments. So in addition to best new ankylosaur, we have best new ceratopsid, which there wasn't much competition. I will say there's the ceratopsian gremlin, which another contender for best name, I think.
I actually thought about making Gremlin the cutest dinosaur, but they named it Gremlin. Gremlin can't be the cutest.
Oh no. Gremlins could maybe be cute.
Maybe.
Anyway, this is best new ceratopsid. So that goes to Furcatoceratops, which we covered in episode 455. It's a cool one. It lived in the late Cretaceous. It was found in Montana in the US, in the Judith River Formation, where a lot of ceratopsians have been found, but a lot of those skeletons are fragmentary, and this one was a nearly complete skeleton that was found. It was disarticulated, but they found parts of the frill, beak, horns, a lot of the skull, most of the middle of the body, ribs, vertebrae, pelvis, shoulder, and more, a lot of the tail, and bones from 3 out of 4 of the legs. It really helps fill in gaps of what the bodies of ceratopsids looked like. Because when we think of ceratopsids, we often think of the skulls.
Yeah. A lot of times that's all you get.
Yes.
A skull or part of a skull.
In this case, Furcatoceratops looked somewhat similar to Pseudoceratops, and they're closely related. So it had the bulky body, it walked on all fours, and it didn't have that nasal horn. It also had a short frill with 2 short brow horns that pointed straight ahead and a rounded snout.
When you say short, it's short for a ceratopsian.
Yes.
Long for any other dinosaur.
Yes.
Still quite large brow horns.
But so the name for Cutest means fork-like, and that refers to the horns looking like a 2-pronged fork.
Yeah, they're pretty close together.
Yeah.
And parallel.
And like I said, there's no nose horn. Well, it's at least unclear if it had a horn on its nose. The nasal has a low bump, so that makes it similar to Pseudoceratops. So it was moderately sized. It was about 10 feet or 3 meters long and 5 feet or 1.5 meters tall. That's according to the skeletal reconstruction figure in the paper. So its body size is comparable to relatively large adult-sized centrosaurines.
Although nowhere near the size of a full-grown Triceratops or something like that.
True. Oh, and I should mention Furcatoceratops is a centrosaurine ceratopsid. They think that this specimen was a subadult. They did histology on it, and it was probably 2 to 3 years old when it died. And that makes it even more important because juvenile or subadult ceratopsian skeletons, especially these earlier centrosaurines, are relatively scarce. So it tells us a lot. It helps fill in a lot of gaps.
Yeah, it's a really good find. Our next award winner is the Best New Ornithomimosaur, and it goes to Tyrannomimus. We talked about it in episode 461. I don't know if I've mentioned that for any of the other ones, the way Sabrina has been. But we'll have the list of all the winners and what episodes they're in our show notes on iknowdino.com if you want to go there. It's probably easier than trying to remember the numbers. So Tyrannomimus is so named with the tyranno part because its hips, specifically the ilium, has a vertical ridge on it that was previously only ever found in tyrannosauroids. And it's also an ornithomimosaur, so you get the mimus part. So it's a tyrannosaur hip-like ornithomimosaur, Tyrannomimus.
Mm-hmm.
The really cool thing about this one is that sometime in the early Cretaceous, Ornithomimosaurs split into Ornithomimidae and Dinochyridae, featuring Dinochirus, one of our favorites. And one of the main differences between the two is that Dinochirids lacked some of the adaptations for running fast, so they were probably slower than Ornithomimids. Tyrannomimus is around that time period, about 120 million years ago. And they found quite a bit of it. They got pieces of both legs and feet, arm and hand bones, several hand and foot claws, 2 small skull fragments, and some vertebrae, and obviously that part of the hips. Unfortunately, none of the limbs are all that complete, but it's enough to tell us a lot about the dinosaur. And part of the reason it made news is because it is the oldest definitive dinochirid, as they put it, because there are a couple others that might be dinochirids, which tells us about this evolution to Dinochirus, one of our all-time favorite dinosaurs. And also just threw a monkey wrench into some of the Tyrannosaurus analysis, where we were using that ridge on the hip to identify things as Tyrannosaurus or Tyrannosaurids. And now we know that it wasn't just the Tyrannosauroids even that had that. Our next dinosaur is our best basal sauropodomorph and also our runner-up for the best new dinosaur.
Yay, sauropod. No morph.
Omorph. This one's Qianlong. And the discovery is more than just one dinosaur. Actually, it's 3 dinosaurs. There was a new adult and also a couple of subadults, also 5 clutches of eggs. 6 of those eggs have embryos inside. If we were just basing it on the find itself, it would be the best new dinosaur, but I'm trying to do it based on the dinosaur side of it.
I see. The eggs were leathery too.
Yeah, so that's a whole interesting side of the dinosaurs. And, it's showing us that even in the early Jurassic, when this find is from, is about 190 to 200 million years ago, some of the dinosaurs still had those leathery eggs. It's very interesting. They weren't all hard-shelled. And one of the things that I found really striking about it is that Qianlong has kind of a pointed snout, more so than you see on a lot of these early Jurassic herbivorous dinosaurs. Although we're pretty confident it was herbivorous because there's a really great set of teeth preserved with it that are not serrated and clearly look more like what you'd expect to see on a plant eater. It's also pretty cool because they gave the species name Shouhu, which means guarding in Mandarin, and so it kind of has a similar name to the good mother lizard, Maiasaura, in that they think it was probably protecting these eggs and maybe the juveniles that were nearby.
See, sauropods aren't all bad.
Omorphs. It's also another piece of evidence that maybe sauropodomorphs went from quadrupedal to bipedal because there's an embryo preserved that clearly has arms and legs about the same length, so it's probably quadrupedal, whereas the adult is definitely bipedal.
Good stuff.
So Qianlong is definitely one of the best dinosaur discoveries of the year. And as I'm talking about it, I'm starting to wonder, maybe it should be the best herbivore of the year.
Ooh.
It's very good. But on to our winner of Best Dinosaur of the Year, and also Best Herbivore of the Year, and also Best alvarezsaurid of the Year, and runner-up for Cutest Dinosaur.
Way to give it away, Best alvarezsaurid.
And it is Jaculinykus, very recently on the show in episode 470.
Even though I love sauropods and sauropodomorphs, I do think Jaculinykus deserves the Best Dinosaur of the Year one.
It's pretty amazing. We don't have a lot of hands of alvarezsaurids, and in this case we have both of its hands pretty much completely preserved, which is really amazing. And in addition to just the dinosaur itself, much like with Qianlong, how we saw something about its behavior a little bit in proximity to other dinosaurs. In this case, we saw a little bit of its behavior in its death pose because it's curled up into a cute little ball, like it just laid down for a nap in a similar position to a bird.
Yeah, I'm very partial to dinosaurs found in the sleeping positions.
Yeah, like Meilong.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so Jaculinykus is in a very similar pose to a bird. It's got its legs at its side and its head curved around, which looks like it might be resting on top of its tail. And then again, in the paleo art, they made the tail all fluffy. So it's like using a fluffy tail as
like
a pillow. Yeah, it's so great. And of course, the name is pretty cool too, because it comes from a dragon, Jaculus, which was this Greek myth for basically a spear-like dragon, almost, that it flew and would impale its enemies. It didn't have to use poison or big teeth or anything like that. For the record, too, it's from Mongolia. It's about 75 centimeters or 2.5 feet long, approximately, and about 1.5 feet or 45 centimeters tall, which is why it could have been the cutest dinosaur. But alvarezsaurids are a little bit creepy with their big chest claws, the huge claws sticking out, probably for getting at termites. Although this one with its little skinny pinky might have looked kind of cute and funny.
Might have been really fluffy too. So.
It's really hard to know. When you're only looking at skeletons, you really can't tell how cute something is. Because if you look at a horse skull, there's nothing cute about that. But then when you see the big fleshy nose rather than the pointy piece of bone, it looks so much cuter. We are probably a little biased, though, because in that recent episode, we were talking about how we really like alvarezsaurids. So
that's true.
Jaculinykus, our dinosaur of the year. We've got more dinosaur studies to cover, but I want to mention our most popular dinosaur connection challenges. The first one was Titanic.
I think it was our first dinosaur connection challenge, too.
Oh, was it? I do love Titanic, and it was very fun researching. Basically, our connection was that this other boat, the SS Mount Temple, sunk 2 years before Titanic, also in the North Atlantic. And among other things, the SS Mount Temple was carrying 22 crates of dinosaur fossils. So there's this similarity between the two. And then even weirder is that that same boat, the SS Mount Temple, responded to the Titanic's distress call. So it sank in the same place roughly, and it also responded to the distress call from Titanic, and it dropped dinosaur bones at the bottom of the ocean, which are probably still there, waiting for somebody to go get. I haven't heard anything about anyone going to get them, but we've recovered deeper shipwrecks at this point, so it should be totally doable if someone wants to go down there and get them.
That's another call there. Remember when we first talked about it, you were like, somebody do this.
Yeah. And we know pretty well where it is because it was scuttled during World War I, and they kept good records of where it was scuttled, so I have pretty precise coordinates on where we think it was. It's easy to find. So hopefully someone goes down there and gets those bones.
The other Dino Connection challenge that we want to call out is the one with Alexander the Great from episode 463.
Yeah, that got a lot of people interested too.
Yes. And you know what? I missed some things the first time around, so I want to thank Tyrant King for calling to my attention another connection. Supposedly, skulls of Protoceratops or a similar animal found by Greeks in the Far East might have inspired the legend of the griffin, and Alexander used the griffin as his personal bird and emblem.
Yeah, I think we've talked about that connection between the griffin and Protoceratops, but not that Alexander the Great used the griffin. So in a way, he might have been using Protoceratops as his own emblem. That's pretty cool.
I did do some quick research on this, though, and Mark Whitten has a very in-depth blog post from 2016 titled, Why Protoceratops Almost Certainly Wasn't the Inspiration for the Griffin Legend.
Da-da-da.
A quick summary of the main issues that he outlined are, quote, Near Eastern griffin culture seems to occur thousands of years before we have evidence for it in Central Asia, suggesting Protoceratops' anatomy could not be referenced in any way in the conception of the original griffin. Griffin anatomies in all their variants are entirely and best explained as chimeras of extant animals. There's no need to invoke any exotic fossil anatomies in their design. Griffin iconography and perhaps written legends are sufficiently varied to suggest a complex set of origins and legends for these creatures. Ancient Greek writings seem to lack compelling references to Protoceratops, and the aspects of appearance and behavior they discuss clearly indicate they were not informed by fossilized animals. Several details of these accounts suggest they must be talking about imaginary creatures. Protoceratops fossils are found hundreds of kilometers from ancient Scythian gold mines, undermining the suggestion they might be the source of griffin gold guarding lore. There's no indication, historic or geological, that fossils of this dinosaur species have ever been associated with gold. End quote.
Interesting.
He ends it with, quote, "So no, I can't see any reason to think Protoceratops has anything to do with griffin lore and entirely understand the mainstream view of it as a chimeric animal cooked up by ancient cultures of the Near East. Interestingly, none of the recent papers on griffin lore and imagery I looked at in preparation for this article mention the Protoceratops griffin hypothesis, and it's surprisingly challenging to find much mention of it in any peer-reviewed literature." End quote. And he cited earlier in his blog post that the idea became more established in a 1993 paper. He ends it with, quote, "It clearly has not been adopted as readily by archaeologists as by those of us interested in dinosaur science. I suspect this idea has found greater mileage among the paleontologically minded because it presents an interesting and seemingly reasonable story, but it also straddles disciplines and knowledge bases to discourage further research from people mainly interested in extinct animals. Given the lack of commentary on this idea from archaeological quarters, I'm curious to know what folks with a greater understanding of ancient cultures and history make of this idea." End quote. So it seems the link between Protoceratops and the griffin is not so cut and dry. But it was interesting to learn more about.
Yeah, it sounds like that connection he made between, or lack of a connection that he found between the gold mines and where Protoceratops was found is close, but not close enough, because he said it was a couple 100 miles away.
Mm-hmm.
So you could see how people are like, oh, it's in roughly this part of Mongolia where they find the Protoceratops and where they find the gold. But when you really get into it, you see that they're not quite close enough for that to be a good explanation.
But it was a widespread hypothesis for many years. So
yeah, we saw a book that's basically all about that.
Mm-hmm. We also had another tip from Weiser on Alexander the Great and all the Alexandrias that he founded. For example, the furthest one away from Macedon was called Alexandria Eschatos, which literally means Alexandria the furthest. He built the settlement in 329 BC. It's now known as Hujan. It's one of the oldest cities in Central Asia. It goes back to about 2,500 years to the Persian Empire, and it's been part of various empires, so that area has been renamed quite a bit. And now it's part of Tajikistan, and the city is close to the borders of Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan. And it is situated on a river at the mouth of the Fergana Valley, which, thank you, Weiser, for that tip, because there are dinosaurs that have been found there. And a few that I found include Furcatoceratops, which means Fergana Valley lizard. It was a sauropod named in 2003. The holotype includes vertebrae from the back and tail and a pelvis and limb bones. The fossils were found in 1966, but they'd been lost. And then there was a second specimen found in 2000. It's estimated to be up to 59 feet or 18 meters long and weigh up to 15 tons. There's also Ferganocephaly, a dubious neo-ornithischian that was at first thought to be a pachycephalosaur, one of the dinosaurs with domes on the head, but later it was thought, well, it's too incomplete to know what kind of dinosaur it is, and the teeth that it was based on, the name, doesn't look like pachycephalosaur teeth. There's no serrations. And it was first named in 2005 just based on teeth. But the holotype is just one adult tooth. So not a lot to go on. There's also some indeterminate dinosaurs, though we don't have enough fossils to know the specific species, but they include neosauropods, tetanurans, and stegosaurs.
We've talked about that region in Tajikistan before, and it does sound pretty promising, although I don't think there's currently much going on there in the way of paleontology. Hopefully that changes in the future.
Mm-hmm.
But speaking of animals that were inspiring mythical creatures, our most shared interview was the interview with John Holmes about Tolkien's presentation on dragons. That was in episode 433, and it was all about how dinosaurs helped inform Tolkien's dragons for Lord of the Rings. So don't fret if you're upset that the griffin was not inspired by Protoceratops, because Tolkien's dragons were, at least in some part, inspired by dinosaurs.
Yes. I thought you were going to rhyme there. Don't fret. Don't get upset.
I did do one rhyme, but yeah, it was just a single couplet. And we'll get on to our most impressive fossil of the year, which is quite controversial. But first, we're going to pause for a quick sponsor break.
And now for our most impressive fossil of the year. Dun dun dun. It's the fossil that shows a mammal eating a dinosaur. That's a very simplified way of putting it. We covered this in episode 458. The mammal Repenomamus is interlocked with a Psittacosaurus, and it seems that the mammal is winning and maybe even instigated this fight, and that the Psittacosaurus might have laid down and just succumbed to being prey, even though the Psittacosaurus is much bigger than the mammal.
And it might also just be eating a dead Psittacosaurus, but they're sort of interlocked in a way where it's almost like one is biting at the other, and there's like some grabbing going on in a way that makes it look like they're fighting.
Yes, there hasn't been any papers to refute this find as of this recording, and I don't know if there will be.
I expected there to be at this point because there was some pretty harsh criticism of it. So I just checked right before we recorded too to see if it had been cited by any other papers, but it hasn't yet.
Yeah, but the authors of the paper had a whole section on why the skeleton was real and why it wasn't forged and why they think that the mammal was the one that's attacking. They do say it's not immediately obvious that the mammal's the one attacking, and it could look like it's scavenging, but there's 3 things that gave it away. The Psittacosaurus didn't have teeth marks on it, which you commonly see when there's carnivorous mammals scavenging. It also seems unlikely that the two of them would be so entangled if the Psittacosaurus was already dead, and the mammal could have just taken bites of the dinosaur while on the ground, but instead it was on top of the dinosaur.
Yeah, but I think the biggest criticism for it looking fake is that just how interlocked they are, because they've got arms and legs intertwined in a way that don't make a lot of sense if there was still meat on both arms and legs. It's almost like the bones are wrapped around each other, like the hand and the foot of the mammal are sort of grabbing directly onto the bones of the dinosaur. And it looks really good in the skeleton form, but when you think about it covered in meat, if it was eating or if they were fighting, that hand and foot would have been really far away from the actual bone. They wouldn't have been wrapped around the bone the way they are in the fossil. But it is possible that they decomposed and it sort of slowly over time came down and maybe with a little bit of rigor mortis type stuff grabbed around those bones. But it does look a little suspicious once you notice that detail.
If I'm remembering correctly, though, the controversy isn't on whether the fossil is fake so much as, well, it seems like it could be a scavenging type thing, not attacking.
There's also a controversy about it being fake. And not necessarily that the bones themselves are fake, but that it was posed, essentially. But again, there haven't been any follow-up papers. So for now, it's just the most amazing fossil that we have of the year. And we'll have to see if it holds up.
I hope it does. It's really cool. It looks really cool. I do want to say the controversy, even if the fossil is found to be faked in some way, it's not that the paleontologist who described it did that. It's like maybe it came to them that way because it was donated, I think.
I think so too, yeah. Up next, we've got our best paleopathology.
Oh, I love pathologies.
Although I always feel like, is it best? And also saying we love pathologies seems a little mean because it's injuries.
Yes, but you know what? They haven't been suffering for a long time.
That's true. They've been out of their misery for tens of millions of years. So our best paleopathology is Tarchia, and specifically nodules that are found in its nasal passages. Way back in episode 215, Sabrina mentioned that a skull of Tarchia has what looks like a Tarbosaurus tooth mark on it. And then in episode 440, we finally found out about the pathology that may have resulted from it. Basically, this giant hole may have introduced an infection that eventually spread from the outer part of its head into the sinuses and caused all these nodule bumps to form and actually are preserved in the fossil. Although the other possibility is that the Tarchia got a sinus infection that got really bad and eventually spread to the bone and the brain and probably killed Tarchia. So we're not sure if the infection spread from the inside out or the outside in this case. But either way, the sinus got really infected. And the interesting thing, too, is that almost all the nodules are on one side of the nasal passage, which is the kind of thing that you often see in a nasal infection. If you've ever had a nasal infection, you know it tends to affect one side more than the other.
We have a couple runner-ups for pathologies, including an Ornithomimosaur that was injured via blunt force trauma to its foot. Ouch. Looking at it through x-rays and histology, the scientists found this butterfly fragment fracture pattern that's commonly associated with blunt force trauma to a long bone. And they also found inflammation of the bone, so they think there's this blunt force trauma, possibly from battling another ornithomimid or from defending itself against a predator. And it seems like it resulted in a fracture and some soft tissue injury and then developed into a bacterial infection that ended up destroying the bone.
Oof.
And the poor Ornithomimosaur probably had trouble putting weight on its foot until it died.
That's a nasty one.
Mm-hmm.
We also, in episode 468, talked about another occurrence of T-Rex biting Triceratops, and in this case, potentially biting hard enough on the frill that it completely broke off the edge of it, which was my pizza crust analogy, like it ate the crust off of the pizza of the Triceratops. And there's also a whole bunch of gouges and other little holes and things in the frill, so that Triceratops was in for a rough time.
Mm-hmm.
It survived some of them. We could see some healing on some of it, but not all of it. I also have a best ankylosaur paper.
Couldn't help yourself, could you?
I couldn't. It was from Victoria Arbor talking about how Zool shows evidence of ankylosaurs fighting each other. And basically what they found was that there are a bunch of osteoderms near the hips, but way down on the sides, like the sides of its body, that are broken. And they're broken in a position where you wouldn't expect it to have been caused by a predator biting on it. Because a predator you'd assume would come from above, because most of the predators were pretty tall compared to Zool.
Mm-hmm.
And the osteoderms on top of it seem to be in pretty good shape. It's the ones that are on the side that are damaged, and they line up with where if a couple of Zool backed up next to each other, they could just bash each other in the hips with their tails, and that's about where they line up. So that makes the most sense. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's what the clubs were used for most of the time, but they may have been used for defending themselves against tyrannosaurs and other large predators, as well as competition. Rock'em Sock'em Robot style.
I like Rock'em Sock'em Robots.
Rock'em Sock'em Zools.
Yeah.
Or ankylosaurs.
We also have an award for Best Dinosaur Egg Hiding in Plain Sight. It's like the ultimate Easter egg hunt.
Mm-hmm.
And this is an agate crystal that was found in the collections of the Natural History Museum in London that turned out to be a titanosaur egg.
Yeah, that's so cool that it was just in their like gem collection.
Since 1883. Yeah, the egg, it's spherical, it's light pink and white banded inside. It's about 6 inches or 15 centimeters across. And one of the mineral curators, Robin Hansen, actually noticed that it might be a dinosaur egg when they went and saw a mineral show somewhere else and found, or somebody showed them an agatized dinosaur egg that looked exactly like the one in their collections.
Like, wait a second, I've seen this before.
Yeah. Yeah, it turns out this egg's about 67 million years old. But it got, there's some silica-rich water that might have gotten into it, the shell, and then crystallized. So, pretty cool. Our next award goes to, we put biggest disappointment, but I feel bad saying that, so I'm going to say biggest surprise, maybe? And it's the Therizinosaurus claws may have been useless.
Yeah.
We covered this in episode 434, and there was this study about a bunch of different claws, they called it the most bizarre theropod claws. But yeah, the gist is that Therizinosaurus claws, they were just so large, maybe they were just too delicate to be able to do much with them.
Yeah, I think you said it was sort of the proportions, right? That they were too thin for their length to put much force on them. It might break them if they were actually trying to slash or do too much with their claws.
Yeah, which is too bad. Why did they have such big claws? Well, maybe it's for decoration or just to look bigger or to attract mates.
I do want to see another study on this, what other people think, if they were completely functionally useless or if they might have still had a little bit of value in something physical. Our next award goes to the best mohawk study.
That's a very specific one.
Yeah. It's for Amargasaurus, and it's really cool neck spines in episode 439. So Amargasaurus is a dicrasaurid, just like Bahadasaurus, and their vertebrae actually have these really long, they call them hemispinous processes, hemi meaning half. Sometimes they're also called bifurcated neural spines. Either way, it means there are two long pieces of bone that stick up off the top of the vertebrae. Mm-hmm. So twice as much as you see on something like Spinosaurus or Aranosaurus, where it's just the one sticking up.
In Amargasaurus's case, it's a sauropod. So it's got the long neck.
Yes, all dicrasaurids are sauropods. And previously, it's mostly been thought, I would say, some of the recent studies were that Bahadasaurus and Amargasaurus had these similar spines sticking up out of their neck, and that they might have been covered in keratin. But this new study this year looked at the structure of the bone in these bifurcated neural spines and found that the bone had obliquely oriented Sharpie's fiber, which basically means that there were anchor points for tendons and ligaments on those bifurcated neural spines. And if it was covered in keratin, it wouldn't have tendons and ligaments in it. The only reason it would have those is if it would actually had a sail connecting the spines together. So they think that instead of having spiky horns sticking out of their neck, they instead had a pair of sails running down their neck, and thus a mohawk.
Nice. Yeah, I remember I liked the art that went with it, or not necessarily with that paper specifically, but the art that has popped up since.
I like them both ways. Either with the keratin or with the sails, it looks really cool. You can't really go wrong with those really impressive spines sticking up out of the neck. And last but not least, in our awards for this segment, I'll do a couple more for the fun fact, but for this part is the biggest change to a popular dinosaur, and it's not Spinosaurus.
Not this year, anyway.
No, I'm giving it to Utah Raptor, which is now considered 10 million years older than it was previously thought. And that's because the yellow cat member of the Cedar Mountain Formation, where it's found, had some new dating from zircon radiometric dating, and also this thing called the Weissert event, which was a drop in carbon dioxide levels, and they both line up with this being about 10 million years older than it previously was thought. So originally, Utah Raptor was estimated to be about 125 million years old, and now it's thought to be about 135 million years old. And the reason this is such a big deal is it shifts not only Utah Raptor, but several other dinosaurs back. And as one of the co-authors put it, this is an agenda-setting discovery that will reverberate for decades. Certainly in plenty of books that have said Utah Raptor is 125 million years old.
Yes.
Not anymore. And I'm sure it's going to shift some other similar sites in Utah as well.
So those are the big discoveries and papers from the year. But we also had some milestones of our own, I would say, for this podcast. For example, we celebrated our 8-year anniversary of the podcast with our Styracosaurus patch. We also made a special episode about the best dinosaur museums in the world to celebrate our 8 years of podcasting. And of course, we started our I Know Paleo bonus episodes. We've done a few mini seasons, including the Prehistoric Planet mini season, where we actually got to watch the episodes a little bit earlier than when it was released, so we could get all that content out in time, which was pretty cool.
And we had some interviews to go with it.
We have our Dinosauroid episode and a few other special episodes like that. We had our milestone episode, Celebration of Ceratopsians, for episode 450. We started doing some classic episodes where we remastered the audio, so hopefully we, and by we I mean mostly Garret, won't feel like it's all cringy to listen to.
And hopefully more people can understand the interviews.
Yes. We had the Beyond Bones, another mini-series. We covered SVP again this year. We got to go to a Hollywood premiere to see the documentary Why Dinosaurs, which was amazing. And we hosted our first trivia night at the California Academy of Sciences, which was a lot of fun. With those 40 new dinosaur discoveries, we set a record for ourselves where we covered 7 of them in one episode. Of course, we had our mammoth episode, the bonus? Maybe
it was just 2 bonuses.
Just 2 bonuses.
2 bonuses is enough. You don't need 3 bonuses.
I like to add where I can. And we got to do some cool stuff with our listeners, like our new Dinos on Trial segment and our Dinosaur Connection Challenge segments. So I'd say 2023 was a very good year for us. And thank you to our listeners. Because of you, we're able to do all of these things.
Yeah, definitely. And hopefully you liked those things. If there are things you didn't like, there'll be a survey coming up soon, and you can tell us which parts you didn't like so much.
And which parts you did, so we can keep doing it.
Yeah, that's true.
And now on to our dinosaur of the day, Elopteryx, which was a request from Tyrant King via our Patreon and Discord, so thanks. Elopteryx was a theropod that lived in the late Cretaceous in what is now Romania, on the Hatzeg Island. It looked bird-like, but with a really long tail, and it also had long legs, and it had a beak. This is according to paleoart that shows it. It's known from very few fossils, so many paleontologists consider it to be a novum dubium. We did talk about it briefly in episode 400, which was all about the Hatzeg Formation, but I found a little bit more information for this episode. So the type and only species is Elopteryx knopshaii. Franz Nopsha found bone fragments of the small theropod, which were acquired by the British Museum of Natural History, and then Charles William Andrews named Elopteryx in 1913. The genus name means marsh wing, and the species name is, of course, in honor of Nopsha. The holotype is just a left femur, so just a left leg bone. There was a fragment of upper left thigh bone that was later referred to Elopteryx as well as part of a lower leg. Andrews thought that it was a seabird when he named it. And there's been a lot of debate over what Elopteryx was. Was it a bird, a troodontid, a maniraptor, an alvarezsaurid? And various fossils have been referred to it, but most of them were then reassigned to other species.
I can see why it might be a nomen dubium when we have so little that you can't even figure out more specific than theropod.
Yes. It was bird-like, but it's not related to modern birds, which just adds to what you were saying, Garrett. There were 2 studies in 2019 that found Elopteryx to be a basal bird.
So maybe it was related to modern birds.
Maybe. It lived on a large island in the Tethys Sea in a subtropical climate with rainy and dry seasons, and other animals that lived around the same time and place include the Titanosaur Magyarosaurus, the Rhabdodontid Zalmoxes, and the apex predator, of course, the Azhdarchid pterosaur Hatzegopteryx.
And for our fun fact, I'm going to go through my 3 favorites for the year.
Couldn't narrow it down to one, huh?
I couldn't. So the first one, I think, is that T-Rex had the largest eyes of any dinosaur and probably the largest eyes of any land animal, period.
Oh yeah, I remember that one.
We think that their eyes were about the size of an average grapefruit, about 13 to 16 centimeters in diameter or 5 to 6 inches, probably weighed about 2 kilograms or 4 to 5 pounds.
Just the eye.
Just one eye. That's pretty nuts. And there was also a study done this year that said T-Rex's eyes could have been even bigger, but they sort of sacrificed having larger eyes for having a stronger bite. So it's pretty incredible how big their eyes were. And for the record, the largest eyes of any living animal today are still on a dinosaur, and they are on the ostrich, which are about 2 inches or 5 centimeters in diameter, although they only weigh about 60 grams or 2 ounces.
And a much smaller head.
Yeah. Another favorite fun fact of mine that has come up many times since I mentioned this fun fact is that the late Triassic is most of the Triassic.
Oh yeah, you do bring this up a lot.
It's so confusing because it really doesn't seem like the last 80% almost of the Triassic should be the late Triassic. But really, it's just the late Triassic is a proper noun, and it just refers to most of the Triassic, as it turns out. The middle Triassic is about 20%, and the early Triassic is less than 10% of the Triassic. So it goes less than 5 million years, about 10 million years, and then over 35 million years for early, middle, late. But just keep that in mind whenever you hear something is from the late Triassic. It doesn't mean that it was near the end of the Triassic. A lot of times it means it was basically right in the middle of the Triassic. Super weird and kind of fun.
A fun fact, one might say.
Mm-hmm.
And what's your favorite fun fact?
My favorite fun fact goes to the fact that sauropods would have been really vulnerable to lightning strikes, and not just because they're so tall.
Your favorite fun fact has to do with sauropods being harmed.
I didn't do this just to troll you. Part of the reason I like it so much is because I also learned that the third full week of June is Lightning Safety Awareness Week, and I really wanted to fit that into our show somehow, and I was happy that I was able to do that. And the more I looked into it, because I was trying to figure out what animals would be the most at risk during a lightning storm, and I kind of figured it would be sauropods. I think we talked about Europasaurus getting hit by lightning at one point as like a hypothetical. Not that we have a fossil that's like singed from lightning or anything. But the really interesting thing to me is that with lightning, yes, it's really bad to be the tallest object in an area. So sauropods likely would have been at risk. But it's actually can be worse to be standing right next to a tall object because the lightning can jump over. So if you're something that eats leaves off of trees, that could be a problem. And we think some of the sauropods did that. But then the even weirder thing is that most lightning doesn't have anything to do with being tall and being hit directly at all, or even the lightning jumping over to you. Most animals that get killed by lightning get killed by ground current. So the lightning hits the ground and then travels to the side, spreads out. And if you have a really wide stance,
which sauropods did,
yeah, it increases this effect. It increases the hazard because it'll go up one leg and then down another leg. And sauropods just had the widest stance of any dinosaur. So that combination of tall height, wide stance, eating from tall trees, it's really a perfect storm for getting hit by lightning.
Poor sauropods.
Yeah.
Glad we're on the same page there.
Yeah. There isn't really any way you can disagree with sympathy for animals that are getting hit by lightning.
It's a little bit of a downer to end our episode on.
A little bit.
Well, don't worry. We have a lot of plans already for our episodes in 2024. We're looking forward to it. We'll be celebrating 9 years of podcasting, making I Know Dino. And we're working on a new recording studio. So lots of exciting things in the works.
Yeah, hopefully we finish it in 2024. We've been working on it since 2022. Yeah. So
things take time.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening and for listening with us all year. If you want even more dinosaur goodness, then head over to our website, iknowdino.com. You can sign up for our mailing list. And stay tuned, we have a 2-part episode coming up on the traces that dinosaurs left behind, also known as ichnofossils. Thanks again, and until next time.